This is Open Line on VOCM.
Welcome back to the program. Justin Brake is a reporter and editor at The Independent, and he joins us on line number 3. Good morning, Justin. You're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy. How you doing?
Not too bad, thanks. How about you?
Pretty good.
Okay, let's talk about Bill C-18, the Online News Act. I will admit freely that I'm kind of torn as to what I think of all of this. You know, it's pretty ham-fisted, and Minister Rodriguez says he was shocked with the reaction from Google and from Facebook, Instagram, and others. But, I mean, it played out in Australia the exact same way. I'm curious of your stance what this bill, what it's intended to do, what you think the real-life outcomes will be.
Well, Minister Rodriguez shouldn't be shocked. I mean, I think if he's shocked, then the government clearly didn't think through what the potential consequences and ramifications could be. And also, there were many expert witnesses testifying before committees in Parliament and the Senate, and so, a lot of the potential scenarios have been played out. The hypothetical scenarios have been raised with government already. Looking at this, kind of stepping back and taking a big picture view of this, a big part of the reason why Canada is considered a democratic society is because we have a relatively strong degree of press freedom compared to other countries in the world. And it's our belief at The Independent that in a democratic society, government and big tech should not be standing in the way of news media getting our stories out to the public. And that's exactly what's happening right now with C-18. So, the Liberals, the Trudeau government, present the legislation as their attempt to help Canadian media outlets who are, as we all know, in crisis from the collapse of advertising. And as a result of that, social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and search engines like Google, they've reaped the benefits of that because advertisers have gone to the big tech giants now to advertise. So the federal government has made this law that requires big tech to share a part of their profits with Canadian newsrooms, basically. The government has said that they expect that the funding from the tech giants would fund upward of a third of newsrooms' budgets, which is insane. That's a huge amount of, I don't even know what that is, but that's got to be in like the hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars. I don't know. But big tech, of course, doesn't like that, so they're responding by saying we're not playing that game. Instead, we'll just take away Canadians' ability to share news on our platform. So Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, has already said we're not going to allow the sharing of news, of links to news stories on Facebook or Instagram. And Google has now come out and said we're not going to be sharing links in our search engine, which means, I think 90% or more of people now go to Google to search the internet than compared to any other search engines. And so, hypothetically, when you go to Google and type in a story and you want to find something from VOCM or The Telegram or CBC or The Independent or NTV, you're not going to get those results in your Google search. And so now we're in the conversation has reached a point of, okay, we're about to have a crisis of news sharing and information sharing across the country. And that's where we're at. And that hasn't taken effect yet because the government still has to work out the regulations for this legislation, but that could be coming very soon in the coming months.
Advertising, 80% of the media advertising in this country is spent at Google and Meta, which has been devastating for news outlets. I mean, some of the smaller outlets are closing the doors. This piece of legislation, unfortunately, doesn't look at media consolidation, which is a problem regardless of your political leanings in this country. For me, Justin, this conversation, the problems surrounding this conversation started with the federal government's media bailout, because I know it was important to keep some smaller operations afloat, but it did advance the whole rally cry of fake news being bought and paid for by the Liberal government and up and down the line. So consequently, any conversation about money and local media, whether it be the big ones or the smaller players, that was further complicated with that bailout money initially. What do you think?
Well, that bailout did not favor small independent media outlets. I mean, we saw the big ones like Post Media taking millions and millions of dollars and still making cuts, laying off journalists, laying off staff, shutting down newsrooms, and turning profits. So that was flawed from the beginning, obviously. And of course, there's the argument that government shouldn't be funding news in the first place. Now, I think CBC is an exception to that because they have legislation in place that ensures editorial independence. And I do think that we need a much better funded and stronger, national public broadcaster. But for the rest of us, I mean, a free press cannot be operating at the whims of a government that funds it in part or in whole, and also at the whims of big companies like Google and Meta. But also, like you mentioned, media consolidation. We're seeing there are two companies that own the majority of news media in Canada now, and that is also a big problem. And you're right, the federal government didn't really address that, and that's something that should be addressed because once we've seen it in Newfoundland, right? We've seen all of our community papers across Newfoundland and Labrador being bought and sold over the years, and once they get sold, they get shut down, and that has devastated our province, and we are, a large news desert now when it comes to local community reporting.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Canadians will be able to see Canadian news, but you'll have to go directly to the source. It won't be on your Facebook feed, it won't be on your Google search engine, but you can still go to CTV or Global or Rebel or Independent, VOCM, all the rest, and get the news. But it's the ease with which people were able to find it that's potentially going by the wayside. Look, I get people's concerns with all of this, but nothing's going to change unless some of the large advertisers who see the merit in protecting especially smaller media outlets, because it's fine to get the big high-level headlines from some of the national entities and the two big players in the industry. But when smaller outlets and medium-sized outlets go by the wayside, some of the things that are absolutely critical to your day-to-day life, those stories won't be told. So whether it be small-town councils or those types of things, which has an impact on a lot of the things you touch and feel every day, that's going to be jeopardized if this goes horribly wrong. So unless big advertisers, whether it be car companies, the telcos, the banks, unless they see the merit in protecting the free, independent media landscape, nothing's going to change.
That argument is fair, and it can be made that advertisers need to support media as well. But I mean, that's not what companies' first priority is. The first priority is to gain clientele, improve business, and improve profit and stuff. So I also don't think that it should fall on like the business community or government or whatever necessarily to be taking out ads. Although I do think that it's a strong case to be made that they should be doing that. But we also can't rely on that. I mean, there's a degree of civic responsibility I think that we all have to stay engaged on these issues and protect press freedom. As we saw, what happened with the Independent's coverage of Muskrat Falls, and we got in a bit of trouble there for covering that story. What made that fight a whole lot easier is the fact that a lot of people in the province stood behind us and started making donations of money to help us in our legal defense. And so, that was one little example, I think, of a rare kind of occurrence of public civic support for independent news. And so you're right, people can still go to our websites, right, the Telegram, VOCM, NTV, the Independent, and get the news. But I think data shows, surveys and stats that are out there show that a large number of people, I think more than half, do get their news from social media. So, I don't know if a lot of those people are going to suddenly start, visiting all the news websites on a daily or regular basis to get the news. But we came up with one very simple solution that at the Independent that people can do, and it only takes 30 seconds, which is to go to our website, theindependent.ca, and at the top of the page, you'll see a black box. You can put your email address in there, click the sign up button, and bam, you're on our newsletter email list. So every weekend, we'll send an email out to everybody on that list, and we've got thousands of subscribers already, just saying, here's what we've covered over the last week, share your thoughts, here's what's coming up, here's our new podcasts. And I think a lot of news outlets do offer that newsletter email option. So I would suggest to anybody listening who doesn't want to risk being cut off, from where you get your news, if it's on social media or on Google, to just go to your local news websites where you get your news and look for that email newsletter option, because that's one way to guarantee that you'll still get the news delivered right to you. So that's what we're encouraging all of our readers and supporters to do right now.
Yeah, I mean, media outlets have been forced to be innovative, whether it be in print or otherwise, because the world is changing very, very quickly. And just to be clear, I'm not putting the onus on large advertisers or any government influence on those large advertisers to support the smaller local outlets. It's just that, and of course, their advertising spend is based on anticipated revenue. But I think there's also a case to be made that some of those advertising dollars would not be possibly as impactful, but still very real and measurable. But you're right, the social media platforms dominate the space, they dominate the advertising dollar, so getting this right is going to be important. And I don't care about the political calculation, they can leave them to their own devices. I'm more worried about the future of media. And I do think consolidation is the biggest problem. The Competition Bureau will look at telecoms and grocery chains and all the rest of it. But media somehow belongs inside of that Competition Bureau's mandate as well. I don't know how you do it appropriately, but there's a big case to be made that we're headed down the wrong road with how media is structured and the ownership structure in this country. I'll give you the last word, Justin, before we say goodbye.
Well, you mentioned that media outlets will have to get innovative, and it's kind of that those discussions have already begun. Sure. I've been present in some discussions among new coalitions that are forming among independent media right across the country, and so we're all sharing our concerns with one another. And the conversation at various points in time has shifted to, okay, well, we're going to have to get really creative. We're going to have to find new ways to get our stories and information out to the public. And so I think that you will see that innovation. It's just uncertain right now at this point what it's going to look like, because we're still uncertain about how this is all going to play out. And one possible scenario, and I think that this is very likely, is that when this actually comes into effect, and people go to Google to search for news stories and they get nothing, or they go to they're noticing in their Facebook feeds that there's nothing from Canadian news outlets, people are going to be upset. People go to social media to find out what's happening in their communities. If there's fires in Labrador, or if there's a crisis, on-the-ground crisis somewhere in the province, that's where people go to get their information, to social media. So once people realize that that's not happening anymore, that's not available, I think that there's going to be a more significant public backlash, and hopefully we'll see some action from government and big tech at that point in time. But yeah, we're going to be getting creative as independent media, especially the smaller outlets, and figuring out ways to get to continue to deliver the news to our readers and listeners.
Sure. I mean, it's the classic little guy versus big guy. Let's hope it turns out much more like David versus Goliath, because the future of media is really not in the hands of government, but this is going to be impactful. Now, there is going to be the opportunity to change your search engine and what have you, but that's a generational shift from Google to Bing. Google is the household brand, and that's where people go. So there might be options, but it's going to change. Hopefully the government can get this right, because currently they're not doing a very good job with this particular bill. Good to have you on, Justin. Keep up the good work.
All right. Thanks a lot, Paddy.
Take care. Bye-bye. Justin Brake, reporter, editor at The Independent.